The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain. Today we're talking about a big market disruption that has taken place, and we're talking with Matthew Jackson to share the inside story on this particular disruption. Welcome along to the show.
Thanks, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Look, this is a really interesting story. We're going to be talking about Netflix, ultra-fast broadband, Sky TV, and the disruption that you were involved in with your company, Global Mode, a service that at one time was basically the main way that you could get access to the latest and greatest streaming content in New Zealand. So yeah, really exciting to delve into that today. Before we start, a big thank you to our show partners, to 1NZ, 2 Degrees, Spark, HP, and Gorilla Technology. But without further ado, let's jump in. Tell people a little bit about yourself. What's your background? How did you get involved in the big wide world of tech?
Well, Paul, first let me say thank you very much for having me here today. You know, I've been a big fan of the podcast for some time now. How did I get into tech? Honestly, my mother got me onto the internet when I was 12 years old. I lived in the States. And so if it wasn't for her lifelong passion for education, I wouldn't be doing the work that I do now.
That's pretty cool. Thanks, Mum.
Yeah, thanks, Mum, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, wasn't particularly fond of high school at the time. Left and she said, well, you can go to university. I said, really? What would I study? And she said, well, just pick the things that you like. And I chose international business, marketing, and management systems. And to be honest, to this day, I still do the same work.
That's very cool. Yeah, I mean, certainly for myself, my mother played an important role, especially in terms of providing access to technology that as a youngster I certainly wouldn't have been able to afford myself. So
I guess the question you're probably asking me is, what is my day job? I guess my background is in disruption. That's what we're going to talk about today. Now I'm the co-founder of Elementary Systems. We take poo and turn it into jet fuel. I'm also an Edmund Hillary Fellow, and I got into the Edmund Hillary Fellowship because I figured out how to make primary healthcare available for free in New Zealand. And I've been a judge of the NZ Compare Broadband and Energy Awards for the last 5 years. So really proud of that work as well, helping kind of shape what our new energy and telecommunications systems need to look like. I guess this year we were really proud to win the Orion Energy Awards for both impact and people's choice, and was one of 4% of people that were awarded a grant from Akina to structure our company for impact this year. So yeah, there's a bit of a mouthful there, but at its core, just a Kiwi lad, called Matthew Jackson, Toko Ingawa, or Waihara Keke Iti Waipunama. I was born in Blenheim in the South Island, and I truly love this country and want to see it be a better place.
That's what we like to hear. That's awesome. Well, yeah, it is great to finally get to sit down and to hear some of the story, because when we look back, look back to the very early days of the New Zealand Tech Podcast, and I guess prior to the show launching, and we launched beginning of 2011. We were in a time that's very, very different to what we have available to us today in terms of the technologies, in terms of what entertainment looked like. If you wanted to really see what was going on, you had to jump on a plane and fly to the United States or somewhere else in the world, in many regards to see what the latest and greatest looked like. But a lot has changed since then. So I'm really, really interested to hear about Global Mode. Maybe you can, start with a little bit of a background on how this business, came about, and what were the challenges as you saw them that existed, at that time.
Yeah, I mean, let me get my thoughts here. But New Zealand has always kind of been an afterthought for world markets. You know, one of the things that exists in New Zealand is parallel importing. It's the reason we have the warehouse. And, you know, there's parts of our legislation for copyright at the time allowed us to import international DVD players and play out of zone DVDs. And the reason for that is we weren't a market that was large enough for people to want to play in. You know, the way that the internet was built was it was designed to be open, but geographic restrictions were put in place, which meant that we weren't getting streaming services direct to New Zealand because we didn't have fiber. Now, you know, we know that you can get Disney on demand. You know, you can't in New Zealand still get Paramount content, HBO Go, but it really didn't stop TVNZ, you know, telling everybody at the time, if you use global mode, you could see Game of Thrones in real time. But the reality is we were pirating a lot of content because we couldn't buy it easily.
Yeah, look, as Kiwis, I mean, we don't see that so much now, and we could delve into some of those reasons, but it was just so commonplace for hard drives to be getting sort of, you know, shipped around between individuals with just sharing these huge libraries of content, right? Mm-hmm. And you know, with $0 kind of changing hands in most cases for them, because there was no way to stream them, and of course, you know, we're in that incredible position as a country where some very smart decisions were made about rolling out fiber around the country, you know, and that has been an absolute game changer for New Zealand. And, you know, still to this day, we are regularly having discussions around the state of broadband, you know, for our neighbours in Australia, and the shambles that is compared to the state that we are at in New Zealand. And of course, that continues to change, and disruption continues to occur in that space with what's going on from a satellite perspective, as well as fiber having got out a lot more broadly, you know, 4G and 5G. But yeah, it was moving around of, you know, hard drives. What were the other? I mean, what did you see? What did your media consumption kind of, you know, look like in those earlier days? And for your friends, how did you operate?
Well, I actually started my career at BCL, which was the state-owned enterprise, which was split from TVNZ. And a lot of the time I spent telling my colleagues that over-the-top services and application layer was where it's going to be. And, you know, at its core of it, why is this conversation still relevant is that disruption is occurring all around us all the time. We're just often not aware of it. And I think why I reached out to you and said, hey, look, we should probably have this conversation, is that we're going through a state of constant disruption now when it comes to climate change. And we went through a state of disruption when it came to COVID. And I saw too many people talking about disruption without actually really knowing what it was, you know? So at the time, what we had was Sky Television that had 600,000 installed satellite dishes. And we had Spark, thank you for sponsoring, of course, that had has a copper network. And if we didn't have fiber, we would have been completely screwed during the pandemic. There'd be really no ability to work from home. In my house, we have 2 fiber connections coming in and a corporate network that's got 18 radios. The internet is that important for our work. We can't have it go down. So, you know, we really didn't have the environment that was going to facilitate that uptake of internet, because the real reason for us to put fiber on at home at the time was to get a high definition content stream, and it wasn't being provided by a local market.
Yeah, there was nowhere you could, you know, Netflix wasn't available in the local market. And when we did start seeing, you know, offerings like QuickFlix, they were very, you know, very limited, very light. You know, there certainly wasn't the 4K, you know, content streams and so on, right? It was a real challenge, and really the only way. And I know we had these conversations, you know, many times on the New Zealand Tech podcast, in those days was, you know, by basically making it look as though you were sitting somewhere else in the world. And, of course, fiber was a pretty key part of the picture, and some of the faster, VDSL type connections and so on that could give us, a speed that would mean that you could stream really good content. But the problem was, if it looked as though you were in New Zealand, you were blocked from Netflix and pretty much every other service that was available. And look, I guess I've known people involved in varying parts of the creative sectors for most of my life. So to me, the idea of having a lot of content on a hard drive just didn't kind of sit right, because I would know, whether it was music or a movie and TV content, just kind of like, oh, that's a real slap in the face to those people I know that are working really hard to produce great content, whether it's the musicians or the movie makers and so on. And so it seemed like, hey, if you can subscribe and pay for that content and appear as though you're sitting in another part of the world, that seemed to really be kind of the only viable option, other than sitting and hoping and waiting for for some official local options to appear, which obviously it took quite a long time to come.
Well, most of the content that's available still isn't here. When Netflix launched, people could toggle between New Zealand Netflix and US Netflix, and the catalog in America was 20,000 titles, where in New Zealand it was between 4,000 to 5,000.
It was tiny, wasn't it?
It was tiny, and when you consider the impact that accessing a paid streaming option had on New Zealand is, and I can only talk about the numbers that I heard from hearsay, because we plugged our technology into broadband providers. It's the first time in the world that anybody had built a wholesale system that was used by multiple providers, and I don't think to this day anybody else has ever built one. But we saw pirating traffic stay the same on our providers' networks, but what we saw is a massive increase, nearly a doubling of internet traffic occurring as people changed their behavior. So, the core of our technology was all around enabling what we call that, the adoption curve. If you think about geo-unblocking technology, at the time you had to download a VPN, which would constrain your high definition traffic. You had to change your DNS settings. It's the most painful process to try to use a third-party DNS server.
Not really something for your non-technical, just general.
It's a settings thing. Right? You've got to have an app. You change this. I'm technical. My wife is a former Reform software developer. It's a difficult process. So when you want to put high definition TV to high definition television directly into the home and have it at the big screen, that's what our technology was designed to do. We had to break the system in order to make it work, but the intention was to bring high definition television into the home so that people would use fiber.
And so, how did that actually play out? How did you get started initially?
Well, I mean, like any origin story, it's in some kitsch little coffee shop off the side of Queen Street. We weren't the original people that had the idea. If you recall, there was a company called MaxNet, which was eventually acquired, I think, in the Vocus tie-up, and they'd launched Global Mode and had shut it down a week later due to legal reasons. I mean, they'd been acquired by a low-risk company from Australia. And at the time, Slingshot went, we think that would be kind of interesting to change and shake up the market. But they asked Unblock Us US for a price, and it was $2.50 a user. So they needed a solution that was a bit more cost effective. We could bring the technology, if we plugged it directly into the network, down to around, I think, 3 cents per user. So pretty cost effective as a cost base. From there, obviously, we had to put a margin in. We didn't really know the value of the product at the time, but when I was brought in, they were like, I said, what do you want me to do? And they said, well, we need a sales guy. And I said, well, what's it worth? And they said, we don't know. And we made up the price, because price is utility plus, scarcity. So we put a price on it of 45 cents. I wasn't to know that actually it would reduce the cost of acquisition for a broadband customer by nearly 90%. So we really didn't understand the value of what we were providing at the time.
Wow. So getting that first bit of business and actually building the offering, how challenging was that?
Look, at the time it was vaporware. Like it was a matter of we had to trust. I mean, the only reason we were able to launch the business is that the senior executive team at Slingshot trusted my business partner. They trusted his ability to build this technology at a very high competent level. And so that's the only reason that we had the business in the first place. From there, we had to build the company, and that meant, creating exclusive contracts. And, we launched Slingshot launched the service as an offer for overseas customers, and within 3 days, they had 1,500 users turn it on. So there was a demand that was not being met for the service. There was a cautious approach that was taken, and when it was eventually launched, we had 5,000 users turn it on within 3 weeks. So a very quick uptake.
Yep. And so, what did it look like for those users? What were they getting? And obviously, it was a pretty easy thing to pitch if it was making it very, very easy for them for Slingshot to acquire new customers.
Well, the biggest the biggest barrier for technology uptake is education. And so, unlike a DNS service or a VPN service, the internet was transparent. You just used your internet the way it was designed. You could log on to Netflix from your browser, and it would be available like we're in New Zealand. But at the same time, you could log on to TVNZ. You weren't restricted from accessing New Zealand content. It's just the internet was transparent to you, and you didn't have to be a technical user.
Whereas if you were logging in without the global mode service, you went to the Netflix website, it basically tell you it wasn't available in this country, right? Whereas you were able to go in, set up an account, and away you go.
Correct.
I'm just trying to remember. My memory's a little bit hazy because it is going back a few years. But was it reasonably hard to sign up for Netflix? Did you have to use a certain credit card or give a US address or something? Or was that side actually pretty seamless those days? Your memory may or may not be better than mine on that one.
So at the time, Netflix had no problem with international users. In fact, the data is that 1 in 9 internet users around the world is seen as a US internet user. Right. So effectively, there was no barrier to signing up using any credit card at the time because of the fact that they were looking to grow. They were looking to become worldwide. And if you recall later on, they globally whitelisted 178 countries in one night. So, I don't think there's really ever been a barrier to signing up for a streaming service. The barrier was to actually have the technical knowledge to be able to access them,
Yep. And what happened next?
So after we launched exclusively with Slingshot, we went and then brought on nearly 17 other telecommunications companies to use the service. It operated in a gray area of law, and part of disruption is that you are going to challenge the status quo. It means that you're going to have two sides of the story. We relied on the fact that we were using parallel import law. So the ability for there not to be an exclusive distribution agreement in New Zealand, or the copyright legislation at the time, which is now changed, but allowed a user to remove a geo-prevention measure, which means that you could basically use an out-of-zone DVD player. The media companies that sued us, their view was that we breached their copyright, which was an exclusive distribution agreement. So whenever you're looking at creating system-level change or causing a disruption, not everybody's going to agree with it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And look, I think there's all sorts of other examples of the challenges of disruption and of the impact it can cause, right? And yeah, I don't know, how many sort of scenarios where there have been legal challenges as part of the mix, but yeah, I mean, certainly we look at Uber, they seem to fly very, very close to the sun, as it were, from that perspective. Now, their intentions probably somewhat different from yours, I would say, and although it does certainly carry, we see these hallmarks of having to do things that are going to cause some discomfort, legally or otherwise, when it comes to disruption.
Mostly in the work that I do, we are looking 8, 10, sometimes 15 years out. So often the law hasn't been written for the type of work that we want to do. What we're trying to do is interpret a new system based on current legislation, and then trying to apply those principles to understand how that will work. So often the laws don't exist for the type of work that I would do. The policies exist and the intention does, but not the legislation. So a traditional organization won't often allow chaos, what I call disruption, to occur, because disruption usually comes from chaos. That's where novel things emerge. If we're not looking to change the status quo and we're trying to use the existing regulatory environment to maintain a status quo, then we're probably in a position where we're going to be, like the Kodak of our industry, and I'll be honest with you, I see the same thing happening at the moment when it comes to climate change and emissions, whether it comes to fossil fuel businesses or the dairy industry. There's a lot of, we need to maintain the status quo conversation that's occurring at the moment. And with that, you really miss the opportunity for the change that could occur.
Yeah, it's challenging, isn't it? Because the change, so often change does need to occur. Very, very hard when it's one of those scenarios where you potentially disrupt yourself. And I spent a fair bit of time looking into some of the Kodak story. I spent some time with the inventor of the digital camera from Kodak, Steve Sasson, in upstate, New York, Rochester, where Kodak were based, and with some others there. And the interesting thing around the Kodak story was they were trying so hard to figure out the future, and yet they got completely crushed by it. So these things are always kind of easier said than done, I suppose, to get the great outcomes. And certainly in their case, which I think is common as well, when it comes to disruptive technologies, I mean, part of the disruption is to the existing business, and that's not a very easy thing to go through, right? And I remember talking a little bit about Sky TV through in the media during part of this period of time over the last decade. And it's not too often that I feel comfortable being critical of businesses or their leadership, because look, I'm sitting on the sidelines on most of these things, right?
Yeah.
And I don't have that much skin in the game. Yes, as a consumer and so on. And it's really easy to look at other people and say, oh, I could do that better, or they're doing it wrong. In the same way you look at what the All Black who the All Black selectors have picked, and a lot of us like to sort of get involved and say, oh, the team should be this way or that way, and so on, right? So I'm reasonably cautious about that. But there was a period there where I think I got somewhat frustrated with Sky's approach to things under the leadership of John Fallett. So anyway, going back to the story here, what actually happened from a legal standpoint? You had all these internet service providers signed up. You had people enjoying access to content that they were paying for. Largely I'm picking. And then
without
kind of that the
question.
hammer came down, right?
Look, we made mistakes. Like don't get me wrong. There was one point in time where we broke Sony's network, and I was taking a call because a couple of smart TVs had been returned to Noel Leemings in Newmarket, and the one consistent thing was that they were all Slingshot users. So that kind of thing's going to happen, but you have to get in and resolve them. And look, I do tend to say that disruption happens to an industry from the outside. Okay. I don't traditionally believe that organizations are willing to create the environment that allows the chaos for novel situations to emerge. Startups face significant constraints of capital, and as a result, they have to think differently. It's very different from a senior executive. He's got to a position where he's overseeing a budget, and he's adopted a new agility mindset and trained all those people in it and gone, yes, we're innovation. I truly don't believe people can call themselves innovative. And I know that, what we did during that period of time, it caused nearly $2.1 billion of collapse in Sky's share price. That's a significant impact. And in hindsight, I can see that had a really negative impact on a lot of mum and dad shareholders that held stock in that company. And so disruption can have a really negative impact on people where there are unintended consequences. So, what really happened is that over a period of time, the media companies they'd played their cards to try to get, the rhetoric changed in the media and with government. And eventually, on Easter weekend, we were served documents at 4:00, having a barbecue with the team, and had lawyers show up at the door saying, hey, you're going to court. And, that night on television, Kevin Kendrick saying, hey, look, this is what's going on, and just getting caught completely by surprise.
Right. He's the chief executive at
TVNZ at the time.
New Zealand, right? Yeah.
Now, so we were caught off guard. We were not, I'll be honest with you, we were really naive. And I had no idea what to do. The real story is we got all of the internet providers into a room, and you can imagine the traditional competitors. It's everybody in the room is vehemently competing with each other for that broadband customer, but all in the same room, because at that point in time, the competition was the media industry.
Yeah.
And so, we got back to the office that morning. We had looked at everything we could do, and we had no answer to this. I had a letter that said we were going to turn the network off. We had the right with all of our customers. It's a gray area of law. We had the right to turn the network off without any reason. And so we'd written a letter saying to everybody that we were going to turn the network off. We didn't have the resources to fight this. And I had a really out-of-body experience where actually the whole situation was taken off of our hands. Something that we stood for and we believed in was no longer ours. And it was, Taron Hamilton, I think, GM of Slingshot at the time, now at 2 Degrees, who stood up and said, actually, we're not going to take this. We're going to fight this. This is not how we get treated. And really that spirit of innovation that sits inside of telecommunications, the telecommunications industry, like we're here together, really just took over. And I just remember going, wow, this is no longer ours. We ended up putting $100,000 into a media budget to create a whole series of memes to take the piss out of Sky TV and TVNZ. And honestly, 3 days later, Malcolm Dick sold Vocus I sold M2 to Vocus, or can't remember which companies there were, because there's that many acquisitions at the time.
Yeah,
but
it all got sold.
The whole thing went away not because of the fact that we went to court to debate whether the copyright law was just or not. It's because of the fact that the business got sold. And in our back-to-back agreements, Malcolm had the right to turn the network off. He didn't have to operate it. He didn't need to hold a lawsuit for a company he didn't own. And so the whole thing went away quietly, just as the media companies would have liked to see.
And when you look at that, you mentioned sort of 17 internet service providers. So, what became Vocus and now merged into 2 Degrees, with their brands a pretty big chunk of that for you. That was kind of the key part of it.
Yeah, we had, I think 80% of our revenue was with Slingshot. We were in the process of trying to expand the business into Europe and reinvent our technology to become globally scalable. But without that core client, there was really no reason for it to move forward. If you think now, we have easily 10 streaming options that are available. The product had a useful life cycle, and it came to an end in the way that it needed to.
And when we look at Sky, and I guess they were the one, Sky and their shareholders had the most to lose, right? We'd been in this position here in New Zealand where if you wanted content, premium content without ads, obviously there's a level of what was available free to air, and probably hence the role of Television New Zealand in that situation as well. But really Sky was the place that you had to go to buy content, and satellite dish and so on. It was it was a whole different era in many ways, although there was still today even
the movie studios weren't direct to market. The movie studios weren't direct to market, right? If you think about how we access our content now, we buy the content directly off the studio. That didn't exist at the time. Disney didn't have a service. You couldn't buy Marvel, Paramount, HBO. There was really no direct to consumer option at the time, and now there is. So, what we were seeing was New Zealand trying to stave off of this international competition that was going to come whether or not we liked it or not. And often I think that's the problem that we have as New Zealand businesses. We don't recognize that we're operating in an international market. We don't recognize that these disruptions are occurring all the time. For us, they're almost like a non-event. If we're not involved in them, we can't see them occurring. And as I say, disruption occurs from somebody outside the industry looking at the way the industry needs to change, and then coming at it from a new solution where they have none of the bias or none of the existing mindset associated with how things should operate. They often don't have the same cost base, right? So when you talk about disrupting yourself, you can disrupt yourself, but you don't have to maintain that existing business. And that's why disruption is occurring all the time, because somebody with a new way of doing things without the incumbency of the existing cost of infrastructure can come about it from a new approach.
Now, when it comes to, this sort of very, very digital disruption, there tends to be a much lower cost to entry, right? And, so we see that with, say, if we look at the content consumption today in New Zealand, the role of YouTube, Netflix, TikTok, etc. And there's a fair bit there, compared to what our consumption habits were, a decade ago. It's massively changed, but in large part enabled because of those sort of, lower cost to entry of those players. But we've got other areas that haven't been, disrupted yet to the same degree. We look at our, if you look at the US, for instance, and the role of Amazon within the e-commerce world, they're just so big and so dominant. Yet here in New Zealand, we've only just got a very small taste of that, right? But I think we need to be prepared as a country for what comes next, and there are lots of different ways that these things can actually play out, right? But because it's not so easy, we haven't been hit with the same levels of disruption. But when we look at New Zealand and where we spend our money at a retail level, I think it's going to be a very different story in another decade to where it is now, and the local entities that we buy off. Not that they're all New Zealand owned by a long shot. Certainly, if you look at fast food, it's big international players and the local corner fish and chip shops and things that used to be the norm. When I was growing up, we have seen significant change. And yeah, there's a level of kind of, for me anyway, concern around how do we make sure going forward that actually there is room for those sort of local entities to play out, which we look at from an entertainment perspective now. It's very, very different to what it was, pre ultra fast broadband, and it will continue to, I guess things will continue to get disrupted by the international players, right?
Yeah,
and this is going to keep happening in different areas unless we can really innovate and come up with good things. And to me, part of the solution also is accepting that there are going to be some areas where the local offerings will be largely disrupted, but that's okay because we will innovate in other areas, and we'll go out to the world with disruptive, innovations that will be good for New Zealand and our broader success.
Yeah, I think just coming back to the beginning of what you were saying, disruption isn't about technology enabling something. Disruption is a mindset. It's the ability to recognize what needs to change in the status quo and then go about taking an action that requires you to be vulnerable to know that you don't know what you don't know. And so I don't agree that disruption is about a minimum technology enablement. Yes, you have to have some basic general knowledge and basic specialized knowledge. But for me, I can look at a team of people and tell you that they are going to be disrupted based on how that team is functioning. And I can look at a business and I can tell you at what point in time or where that business will be disrupted because they're not willing to change the status quo. It's possible to see these things, but they're not technology things, they're people things. They're the way that people approach their organization, where they're not willing to change the way that they work. So I don't agree that
it is often to do with business models and I would say innovative ways of operating. However, the technology piece is so often part of the picture as well, isn't it? And there have been a lot of disruptions that wouldn't have necessarily been able to occur without the changes of technology, or not in the way that they did play out anyway.
I agree. And you talked about Amazon, and I spend quite a lot of time in the US. My wife is from Texas and ironically managed the merger of Whole Foods into Amazon, so has reported into Jeff Bezos for a pretty large acquisition.
Yeah.
So I have some pretty interesting insights into that organization. But we don't have the services that Amazon offers in New Zealand. The click, same day delivery. You walk through Silicon Valley and see the driverless cars. There's an expectation of same day delivery from Amazon, and it's a phenomenal service. It is consumption at its highest. Do I agree? Do I agree with the value system of Amazon? And do I think that consumerism is what we need to encourage in New Zealand? Probably not. I think that the future of business is to do good. The future of business is to be local. And as we actually look at where the world's going, some of the things that are important to me now are around making sure that we have an economy in the future as we cost in carbon to all of our business goods and services. New Zealand's in a pretty dire situation now when we export a lot of food. And if you think about the UK and consumer choices, they're expecting on UK shelves to see the carbon footprint of their goods and services. consumers are getting the data at the point of purchase to determine, do I want to buy this product or not, based on what I can see in its supply chain. We want to know that the people that we're buying off are caring for their staff and that are caring for their environment. So I don't think Amazon's a really good example of what a business should aim for in New Zealand.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. But I mean, I use that one, you know, amongst others. You know, we've obviously got, you know, Costco that are, you know, in the market. We've got, you know, IKEA about to land. I mean, we have a big change in that retail landscape in the years ahead. And, you know, I sometimes sort of, you know, ponder the question of, well, in one direction, you know, we cede most of retail to big, massive global players. In the other direction, you know, we innovate, we come up with new ideas and new things and take them out to the world from a retail perspective. You know, in terms of what actually plays out, you know, it'll be a bit of a mix, and you know, I hope that we are able to innovate in that particular area. But even if we don't, there are all sorts of other areas that we can go out and succeed at, right?
New Zealand is incredible at building global niches, doing one thing that's highly specialized very, very, very well. But we often don't have a global mindset, and we don't traditionally have a propensity to take risk. You know, if you think about why Silicon Valley or why Israel, it's because what we've got is capital that's being circulated and cycled in through, that's happened over generations of entrepreneurs who become investors, who have continued to put capital in. And it's not I'll be very clear, I'm not criticizing New Zealand's capital markets, but our angel investor networks are putting, they're taking quite a significant risk if they put, you know, 200,000 or 300,000 into a business. And, you know, if you look at me as an entrepreneur, you know, you could say, well, actually, I wouldn't back you because you took a risk and you lost everything. So if I have a conversation with somebody out of the States and I say, well, I've been sued by New Zealand's media companies, they go, oh, you must have done something right. You know? We've still got a lot to learn when it comes to how do we choose the things that we're going to invest in. And right now, a lot of our investors look at investing in software. They look at investing in software as a service. And let's be honest, software as a service was new in 2013. So, you know, if we're going to be competing internationally, we have to take a real close look at what we're really strong at and what could we do that could have massive worldwide scale if we were to do it in New Zealand based on our policy environment.
Yeah, and look, you know, fortunately, we've you know, we don't have an incredibly large population, but we seem to be a good place for innovation. You know, I think the old Kiwi ingenuity thing is alive and well. But so you know, I think I
disagree with you.
I think that, well, I see it. But yeah, look, I think there's room for a variety of things, right, in terms of our future and how we shore up New Zealand's future. Where export revenues come, from in the years ahead. Obviously, there's some areas that are, that we look at the numbers and we think, okay, well, if we double down on that and we grow that, that's going to work out quite well. There are other areas where there isn't necessarily a whole lot of data, and you can go, oh, look at the numbers. That's exactly, where we should be. You're obviously working in an area at the moment, which is, I would say, it's kind of from outside looking in, it's probably, hard for people to know whether they should bet on some of the things you're involved in, right?
We're looking at systems level change for the water industry, looking at trying to build a circular economy and emissions reform, things that are very grounded in deep tech and science. And I think probably the biggest challenge that I've ever tried to take on. But the same logic exists. New Zealand is full of duopoly businesses, and the same exists in the waste sector. But I want to come back to this idea of being number 8 wired. And Paul, I'll challenge you on that, because can I tell you that when in the networks and the people that I associate with, when they come to New Zealand, they don't feel it's innovative. They come in and they see a view, which is, if it's not been done here, then it's not relevant.
Right.
And you know, I was on the call with an investor this morning where he said, well, you know, you're involved in the government space, and my core concern is if they don't think it's their idea, then they won't back in, they'll shut it down. So the spaces that I play in, I would say that I think we were innovative. I think we had to be at one point in time, but I wonder how much of that we've lost. And that's how I currently feel about it. I do wonder how willing we are to change the status quo, because as a small country in our tall poppies syndrome, we fundamentally don't want to push too much in case we offend somebody. We fundamentally sometimes won't say what we mean because of the fact we don't want to offend that person. So I from where I sit, I don't think we have that number 8 wired innovation as much as we would like to think we do.
Yeah, interesting. And look, I don't know how you how you measure that and how you know, other than financial outputs and areas where we're going.
Is really the
productivity is a shocker in this.
It is. So
country, right?
There's some pretty good evidence to support that we're not that productive, right? Relative to our neighbors. But what we do have is the ability to progress conversations. What New Zealand's incredible at is the ability to have that farm side across the post conversation around, if you think about farmers, they are cooperative. They're not competitive because they share information and knowledge. And one of the characteristics I see of true disruption is two companies that would traditionally been seen as competing, looking to change the status quo to create a new market. And one of the things I think New Zealand has done incredibly well is put biodiversity and well-being at the core of our financial system. So we have amazing opportunities in New Zealand if we're to look at what does our place look like in the world, because we are really innovative in some things where we talk about equality, where we talk about the ability to prioritize mental health, where we talk about workers' rights, where we talk about at its core the Treaty of Waitangi and co-governance and what that really means. We are one of the first countries in the world to make a maunga in a river and give them personhood rights, give the rights that people have under legal protection to a river or a mountain. It's very forward thinking. So we do have spaces of innovation, but I would argue that they're not traditionally inside of a corporation, and that we've kind of lost that edge that we once had because we were constrained and resource constrained. So, I'm open to having that discussion, but just from where I sit, I don't see what we're doing as particularly forward thinking. We often say if it's not being done here, that it won't work. And if it's been from overseas, then, well, actually that's not relevant. And that's what I see in the industry that I work in at the moment, which is the waste industry.
Yeah, look, I mean, often, we look at some of the numbers and the stats that come through from Technology Investment Network and how our tech exports and our most innovative exports are growing at a pace. But then you put that beside where we are from a productivity perspective, and I guess the sort of simple way I tend to break that down is that look, we're doing increasingly better when it comes to on the tech and innovation exports, but then how we apply I guess what I'll often sort of lump in as a futurist mindset, an approach to and a commitment to innovation and change to our normal day-to-day business is where I tend to see where we're lacking the most, right?
I agree.
So it's like you look over there, boy, we're doing well. Look at Xero, look at this, look at that. Oh, there's some good ones coming through over here, and then you turn back to look at the day to day, right? And to a degree, we should bury our heads in shame because our productivity is just so poor. So yeah, look, I mean we have plenty of opportunities ahead. We're probably just about out of time, so it would be interesting to hear a little bit more about where to from here in terms of your thoughts for New Zealand, and a little bit of more around your business and where you think that will go next.
Yeah, well, something that I'm really passionate about at the moment is creating zero waste infrastructure. New Zealand has traditionally treated its land like a landfill. We have actually no consistent water standard across New Zealand, and I think many people will be aware of Three Waters, but not really understand what it is. And so for us at the moment, what we're trying to build is a fair and equitable system that creates zero waste and takes your human waste, takes your poo, and then turns it into energy.
Sounds like a good idea. I can't think of too many better things to do with it.
Well, right now we put it into ponds next to the ocean, which are susceptible to sea level rise, and put it into big bags on the side of the road. In fact, most of the effluent that we have is discharged directly into our waterways. So we don't really do very good things with it at the moment. So yeah,
and look, our population is in New Zealand, generally isn't in decline. So these issues get bigger if we don't come up with some smarter approaches, right?
Yeah, I mean, the big problem that we've got is as we modernize our water infrastructure to create stricter, what we call discharge standards, so that we don't directly discharge industrial effluent or our human waste into the ocean. I don't know why New Zealand decided that it was acceptable that we had to boil water in Canterbury. I don't know why Aucklanders decided that it is acceptable that we wouldn't go for a swim in the beach after the rain. Where were those conversations? What are those conversations? Why are we not having those conversations at the dinner table that we can no longer use our own water for our own livelihood? To me, it just didn't make sense. So when it came to the work that we're doing, we're going to build this new water infrastructure. The government is going through a reform to make it happen. It's actually really important. But if we build this new infrastructure, we have to pay for it somehow. And if we're going to build new infrastructure, we need to power it. And right now, New Zealand has a 60% clean energy shortfall. So, and what are we going to do if we create all of this new byproduct from these water systems? What are we going to do with it? We're going to put it into landfill? That's what we currently do. So our idea is to take that poo and then mix it with our food waste. Now, if you live in Auckland, you would have seen a little compost bin show up outside your house lately.
I've heard about those. I don't think I've seen one yet, but I know it's coming. Yeah.
So what we're saying is, well, we've got this poo that's going into our wastewater system, and we've got this food waste which we're trying to take out of landfills. Why don't we put them into the one system? If we put them into one system, what that means is we can increase the amount of energy that comes from those waste streams. If we treat poo on its own and we treat the food waste on its own, it's not that effective. The food waste doesn't have a lot of nutrients in it. And when we mix those two things together, we can increase the energy by around 400%. And that actually we can export back to the wastewater treatment plant so we can provide the power for that new infrastructure.
Sounds like a good move.
Does sound like a good move.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. Well, we'll look forward to sort of following the journey and seeing how that goes. But we've definitely got a lot of challenges in this country, and we need to be picking them off and getting them addressed. And look, if we can apply the same sort of mindset and thinking that has led to disruption in other areas, and we can bring a positive change to the country, then that sounds good. And then if we can take it and export it to the world, even better, right?
Totally agree. I think the reality is that there's nothing that we can't achieve if we're willing to take a different perspective, to learn about agile thinking, to learn about the frameworks that we can use for these innovative environments. I don't believe that every business should be in chaos to create novel environments, but creating sandpits that are safe to fail, creating environments where you can have vulnerable conversations with your executive and your shareholders and your investors, being able to be authentic in the workplace. If we take on some of these characteristics of being human in the workplace, I absolutely believe that we can be and change the way that our world works.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matthew Jackson. Great to have you on the show.
Likewise, Paul.
Anyone wants to get in touch, what's the best way to find you?
Elementary.systems is our website, but feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and no doubt we'll put all of those profiles in the notes of the show.
Yeah, we will indeed. Excellent. Well, yeah, thank you again. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the New Zealand Tech Podcast this week. We will, of course, be back again next week. And a big thank you to our show partners, to Gorilla Technology, HP, Spark NZ, 2 Degrees, and 1NZ. All right. Cheers.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.